Hi, this is Dr. Randy Bach. Today is August 19, 2024, and I'm honored to have with us tonight Dr. Anna Nolin, the Superintendent of Schools, City of Newton, Massachusetts, not Iowa or any other Newton that might be out there, not to be confused. And we are honored to have her here on the show and in Newton itself. I've heard excellent things about her. I've spoken with members of the school committee, and they did a thorough search, and I think they came up with cream of the crop. So it's been a tumultuous first year. Dr. Nolin wisely demurred on our invitation last year to get kind of her sea legs, and it was a rocky boat ride, I guess, for the year. Dr. Nolin, can you tell us what your impressions were then, now, how they changed? How are the schools? By what measures do you decide how they're doing and whether they're doing well, and so forth? So that's, kind of I guess, an introductory question. You can take it how you like.
Sure. Well, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Any chance I get to talk about the schools, I'll take it, so thank you. So it was a tumultuous year, but it did give me a lot of time to reflect and think on what the school needed in order to move forward. So we've done a really thorough entry plan and audit process of curriculum, assessment, instruction, and there's a lot of work to be done, quite honestly. Many of the items I'm about to say are clearly established very differently in other school districts in Massachusetts. That's not to say that there aren't excellent teachers and very strong experiences happening in the Newton schools. There are very, very exciting things happening, very strong things. But there's a lack of centralized coordination in many of the key areas that I think drive a great school system. So for example, while some components of curriculum exist, there's very few curricular resources that are mandated by the district for use in every particular class. So for example, you might have 15 third grades across the system. They may be using very different materials and approaching standards and expectations in very different ways. And that's not the social contract that I believe public schools need to offer to families and kids. We need to make a guarantee that there's going to be something that is the third grade experience or the ninth grade algebra experience that we guarantee, and then we ensure and inspect that we are getting the product we expect to get. So those are some parts that need tune-ups. For example, while we have created a parent curriculum page recently so parents can see course by course and grade by grade what is taught in every subject, that wasn't available until this year. And now we need to take it beyond standards and just sketch outlines of units and make sure we have pacing guides, common assessments, things that other districts have that measure whether teachers have covered what they were supposed to cover and how did it go for kids. It also allows us to give support in targeted ways to the kids who truly need it. And it allows us to advance students who may be already mastering the content for their particular grade level or their particular course. So very hard to assess how a district is doing if you don't have those things in place. Right. And instruction is our core mission, making sure that students master those skills so that they can launch into college and the workplace. So those were the big things. And I have to say, there's just been so little investment in curriculum and professional development. Teachers were really creating all of their own materials, finding all of their own materials, and I'll just say to you that the budget was just significantly too low for the 12,000 students. Well,
I grew up old enough to remember the 1960s, and a fair amount of the 1970s were what we think of them as the 1960s, both. So I graduated high school back in the 70s. I actually graduated. But there was a joke. We used to read Mad Magazine, and there was Village Voice. But there was kind of a joke about the school without walls. That was an actual.
Oh, I went to one as a kid.
Yeah, that was a term of art.
Yeah.
And so I think Mad Magazine came up with school without floors. The school without ceilings. And they kept kind of riffing on that. And it everyone wants to kind of fight against the man, and but we all conversely need basic tools. We need skills, and so my impression has been My two sons went through the Newton Public Schools entirely, pretty much start to finish. And we moved in, so they started kind of at the older one in third grade. But anyway, the older one did start to finish, and so I have some familiarity with the school. It's a little bit antiquated now because they're men. But it seemed to me that there's a fair amount of kind of begging the question in the kind of original use of that term, that is putting things in evidence which are not established. So it's not so much that a lot of the basics are kind of skipped over, that people kind of move to other things that they can kind of talk about without having some of the basics there. So a lot of times there would be kind of a political thing going on in the class, and people have to learn, like in art class, literally they made protest signs. And I'll just extrapolate that, let people extrapolate on their own. But it seemed that a lot of the basics were skipped over. My kid took Italian class, didn't learn Italian. There was a lot of stuff that was going on, and he learned how to cook. He learned how to do Italian this, Italian that. But a lot of the basics were, kind of passed over. And it's nice to have metrics. I mean, I don't know whether we still do MCAS, we teach the test or that kind of thing. People make fun of that because that's obviously imperfect. Everything's imperfect though, but you need some kind of way of deciding whether everyone who took, math class knew math.
Right. So we're in the position right now of actually putting in those types of checks. Just like any wellness check for a child, right? You're a medical professional. You take those diagnostics on a regular basis so that you can see how your child is developing. Same thing applies for academics. We've put in reading benchmark assessments and early screenings for our youngest learners to ensure that they're on the road to developing those skills. And next year, for the first time, we'll have math benchmarking K to 8, 3 times a year, so that parents and students can get a sense of how's it going, how am I doing against grade level and national standards. And you raised the question of MCAS, which is one measure. It's not something that I would ever recommend test prepping for. We should be arriving at MCAS excellence while we do our journey throughout the regular curriculum. But just to be sure, we'll have these benchmark assessments. And this year we've put in place a tool that actually tracks the interventions that we use with children to ensure that they're not sitting in cycles of extra help or tutoring that they don't need or that isn't sufficient to address their needs. This will all come, of course, with more parent engagement. We've hired a director of family and community engagement because we want parents to know what's happening with their children. We want them to have frequent status updates, and we want to engage them in all the parts of the community so that they feel comfortable, their children feel comfortable, and they know what's happening so they can come to our Parent Academy website or our parent curriculum websites and see, oh, this is what's taught in this grade level. Am I actually seeing that in my class, in my child's class experience? So we're trying to give families the tools to ask us the right questions and to build trust. Because quite frankly, last year's strike and COVID time periods, it's just brought up a lot of nationally, not just in Newton, trust issues with public institutions. And I consider it
It was a funny thing.
Yeah, I consider it important to help restore that balance.
Well, I appreciate that. I like your attitude and your stance, and I think it's a difficult job. It's a little bit expressions like herding cats. Not an easy task sometimes. A lot of things in different directions, and to get everyone paying attention and in a sense like the cat's trained. It takes work and effort. And there has to be some ramifications, repercussions. I think that there's a difficult proposition with any large group that is unionized, such as teachers are. I mean, I think it's different. I ran my own office for 27 years, and I had an office manager watching everybody else pretty much, so I wasn't micromanaging that. But when things came up, they were addressed, and we might very well replace somebody. And it was always, touchy. You have to be very careful and legal about it and present evidence. It's almost like a court of law. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, we could affect that. There was a fair amount of ballast, as a nice term, that my kids experienced through their schooling of teachers who, got maybe moved from place to place because they couldn't do that, or they were depressed, whatever. There were things where they weren't matching up. But they don't, it's hard, I think, to fire people. I think, we can get to kind of some of the budget issues and whatnot, but it's a difficult proposition. And I guess I'll segue to a kind of an add-on question. COVID exposed some of the school aspects. Oddly enough, the schools were sort of closed, but insofar as they were open, they were Zoom, and so anybody could kind of be passing by watching the Zoom. So I think, a lot of our, taxpayers here were a little bit like, shocked, chagrined to see some of the things that were being taught that were not, reading, writing, arithmetic kind of stuff, all these layered things. And, kind of the people don't teach, critical race theory, I understand, but they teach from a place where they've been kind of imbued in critical race theory, and there's a little bit of that that I think circulates. Anyway, so what happened is that the actual census went down. My understanding, you can correct me on the numbers, but my understanding is it went down 14% in that period, and we didn't see a 14% diminishment in the number of teachers, and we didn't see diminishment of 14% of the number of schools, whatever. So the budgets kind of stayed the same. I looked at the budget pretty carefully, and overall, but from start to finish, there was one additional teacher. They didn't add a lot, but they certainly didn't decrease any. So it's hard to manage that kind of thing in that circumstance. I don't want to make any wars with the union. You already had one, but how do you manage in that kind of circumstance, and what are the tools that you have so that a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick? I mean, I don't know how you manage that.
So you're speaking about ensuring teacher quality.
Yes.
So, I can't speak to the COVID learning conditions here, but I have to say to you that the lack of resources provided to teachers means that I can't even imagine what doing COVID was like here as a teacher, because I had a lot more resources at my disposal in my prior district, and it was still very, very difficult. So I'll say that because I think that is a backdrop to this moment that the entire education profession is having around educator burnout and low morale, those types of things. But I would say to you the same issue that existed around guaranteeing viable curriculum that every child has is one of the reasons that we couldn't measure teacher effectiveness as well in the prior administration. If you don't have curriculum and assessments to determine how kids are doing, you don't know which teachers are getting the bright spot results. So this year, I cross-referenced the two data points we do have in the district. So that is iReady reading assessments for the last 3 years and MCAS results. And I cross-referenced those teachers that had 70% or better growth from the majority of their classrooms and their students. So these are like the tippity-top, most effective teachers on the data points that we have so far. And I interviewed them around what it is that they need in order to keep getting these results year after year. That's the kind of target we need to keep putting out there for everyone. And you need to have common assessments and common curriculum so that you can help struggling teachers, first to detect them and then to assist them. Because there's nobody who comes to work every day and wants to be a lousy teacher. No one wants to do that. So, we have to help people be better, right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I spend some of my time watching sports. And so, the New England Patriots and the Celtics are probably in opposite directions right now. The Celtics are at their peak and the Patriots might be at their trough. And I don't think the Patriots go there and they say, oh, well, let's have a horrible year so we can get a great draft pick.
Right.
I don't think people think or act that way. But on the other hand, they can be better and worse managed. And we might see that. We have a new coach. And Celtics had a new coach also, but it's like it's tricky because they have contracts and they it's hard to fire a baseball player, for instance. I mean you can trade them, this and that, but once you sign the contract, you have them. So so sometimes it's difficult. But anyway, I do want to push back on one slight point, which is about the difficulties during COVID. My understanding is the Catholic schools were, for the most part, open. They might have closed here and there, but a little bit like Sweden, they closed for maybe a week, a couple of weeks, whatever. But the teachers stayed. There was no, there was no mass die-off. The kids did fine, all that kind of stuff. And I don't think they had the same problems that the other schools did. First of all, they don't have the same curriculum issue. I think things are a little bit more, standardized. And there's a little bit more scrutiny. The parents come in and out more, and I think there's a lot more kind of give and take because, mind you, the parents are paying directly. Here we pay as taxpayers, but we pay indirectly. We pay into this big machine, kind of, like a Dr. Seuss, Mr. McMonkey McBean. I forget the name of that story.
I know what you mean.
Where all the kind of things percolate down, the stars upon Mars, whatever, and so it comes out, and eventually it gets paid. But I think it's very tricky, as opposed to like a more where you have actual more moment in the physics sense, that you can push thing and something else happens. So I think, in a direct pay system like Catholic school or religious schools in general, you're going to see that. But they stayed open, and the teachers survived. They didn't have, they didn't lose 20% of they lost nobody. Anyway, so, but using that as a template, as a comparison, what can we learn from that example? And are there ways that we can say, I don't know. My understanding is you can't make charter schools in Newton for some reason, but is there any way of kind of making like a college system or a house system? Harvard has different houses. It's not really the same as it used to be. They're more residential, whatever. Is there a way of making kind of competing silos within the institution so that people can kind of gravitate to the place they want, and or have ways of seeing which kind of paradigms work successfully and not? Is there any kind of way of kind of not divide and conquer, but divide and succeed?
So, I mean, one of the tensions you're citing here is how tightly managed Massachusetts schools are. So the charter piece is not a local issue, it's a state issue. So those are controlled by the state. And I can't speak to whether people have tried to make charters here in Newton or not. There's a process for that. I personally tried in my former district to create a digital charter within the public schools, if you will, because there are certain students for whom that was a good fit, what we learned in COVID. So you asked what we could learn. We were a very strong digital teaching district before COVID, and we had a very successful time during COVID. Wanted to make sure that that we could not lose what we learned that was positive about digital teaching, but the state would not allow that to happen. I think it really rests with the school committee about what kind of school models they have. We do have a house system within each high school. I don't know if you know that. So there are different houses, and to that end, there's different innovations that occur. But my most recent meeting with the Secretary of Education, Patrick Tutwiler, spoke to him about loosening the constraints on school systems. For example, we're one of the very few states that doesn't allow all year-round schooling or different alternative types of schooling, extended day schooling, double sessions, 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. I think we should be experimenting with that in Massachusetts, but we are very tightly bound by their time on learning expectations. Now, in terms of innovation within the Newton Public Schools, once we have some common ground that we all are going to cover, you'll see innovations will move up, and we will find those bright spot practices to scale across the district. We just have to start writing that curriculum and start funding it. So those are some soon-to-be parts of our strategic plan.
Okay, I'm going to segue a little bit. We just watched the Olympics, some of us, and some of us didn't watch very much, but I think it's impossible to avoid certain themes that pervade, and they're not unique to the Olympics. Having the, say, questionable boxers win the women's events. And I'm not going to go all medical on this. Okay. The XY chromosome individuals, are you familiar with the Algerian boxer?
Yes.
Okay. So I had a question from one of my contacts who follows us about what we are doing to preserve the women in women's sports, or the girl in girls' sports, and what we're doing to revert. I guess where are we on this at our Newton schools, and which direction are we going?
So this is again governed by state expectations. So who plays in what sports is governed by a state organization called Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, MIAA. So they dictate who can play and who can't, and the expectation is that students who represent as a particular gender are playing in the gender that they say best represents them. I have not come across any conflicts about that here or in my former district, so I would have to know more in order to comment specifically about Newton's landscape.
It always seems that they're going to be the boys playing in the girls, and never the girls playing in the boys.
Well, all I can tell you is that already, regardless of the issues of gender and XY chromosomes that you're talking about, women have played on football teams with boys always for generations.
But to a point, I would say.
No, for legit. My own son's football team, Westboro Rangers, always had a female
Doing,
doing anything she wanted to play. She was a stellar athlete.
but she wasn't pretending to be a boy.
No.
And she wasn't acting as a boy, whatever the word would be, identifying, I guess. So that's a an interesting point, because my sons wrestled at various points, and for the low weight classes early on,
Yep.
There's some girl wrestlers. I mean, I think it provides a point of tension, frankly, because for the boys, it was never a good thing. You know, if they beat the girl, it was like, well, you beat the girl.
Yeah.
If you lose the girl, it's like,
Yeah.
that's kind of something they have a hard time with afterwards. And you could be at a low weight and, freshmen playing, wrestling at 95 pounds, whatever, and lose to a girl who's, a little more further along physically, in a sense. Anyway, total side note. So, now that we're kind of staying cultural issues, I guess, the school didn't sponsor a drag queen story hour, and it might have preceded you, I don't know. And so it's not really a school function per se, but, somebody asked me, if the schools would be equally willing to have a Catholic priest do, story hour. I mean, should the schools be kind of a landing ground or a staging ground for social movements, whether it's, Catholicism or something, say, a little more antithetical to it? My feeling and thought is the school should get really good at the schooling part, and get everyone, super above, where they need to be, high-end targets on their MCAS or whatever their grades and all that kind of stuff, and have them be able to, I don't know, read, write, and defend things, oratory and debate, all that kind of stuff, and then maybe work on all that other stuff. Or maybe they'll get it anyway because we're all part of this, brew.
Well, I think, we're building the next generation of citizens, right? So we've just had a wide-ranging discussion of issues that are dear to you and to your viewers, and we need to build the next generation that have their own issues near and dear to them. You don't suddenly become a citizen, you become trained to be one. Now, I agree with you. I just told you we have to shore up our curriculum, period. That particular incident and show is led on a student cultural day. I don't know if you're aware of these. And so last year, in response to the worries about this, I made sure that we published the full range of cultural days that students would lead to families so they could have conversations with their kids about what was happening and make decisions about their family values and how they wanted to lead. So the days are run by student groups, and so it's this interesting tension, right, of teenagers who are running a group that is about a certain part of their own identity and doing presentations to the whole community about that. So for example, many of our disabled students ran a Student Disability Awareness Day last year at South. That's just one example. So, these young people who, and this did predate me, the young folks who created the programming for that day, felt very strongly that this was part of how they wanted their identity groups represented. It was part of their cultural heritage for that particular group of students, and that is where that came to be. So where you draw the line, I mean, you bring up religion. Religion's a little bit more complicated because of the separation of church and state portion of school. However, students can have religious groups and can have those types of scenarios in public schools, equal access to having their identities known. I don't know why anyone would object to having a clergy person from the community come in and read anything. I haven't heard that to be an issue. So I think, it's hard pressed for me. This is like one minute and extreme slice of the Newton Public Schools. It's not like the day-to-day experience. But I think we would agree, we want students to be empowered and engaged. We're not always going to agree with what they do. Right.
So I guess a kind of a theoretical question, or not it's a real question, but about theory, is who's your boss? For whom are you working?
Well, I mean, quite literally, the school board is my boss. I am their only employee. So, and they are elected representatives of the community. But who do I work for in my heart? I work for the kids. I need to make sure that they have the best experience, the best teachers, and that they leave us ready to be productive citizens. So I work for them. Now, their parents are a part of that, and a deep part of who I care about in the Newton schools is the parents. We have a customer service orientation to how we work with families. That doesn't mean the customer is always right, but we listen to the customer pretty carefully.
Fair enough. So we have just a couple minutes. I'd like to give you free range to give your vision of what will be coming up in the next year or two, and or if you want to address any of the hurt feelings over the union strike and parental disappointments, whatever, however you want to manage this.
Well, the first thing I want to mention to everyone is that this fall, through both the mayor's newsletter and through our own communication channels through the school, we'll continue to define our core competencies for the profile of a Newton graduate. So there'll be surveys coming out. We've been working with the business community and higher ed and students and staff to say, what do we want every single student to leave with in terms of core competencies for being the next generation of leaders in the world. So we'd love to hear from you. When we send out our survey, we'd love you to weigh in on that. That will then parlay into a strategic planning committee, and we invite community members and families to join us. That'll create a 3 to 5 year strategic plan for the district. And I also just want to invite everyone, we now write an annual report, which we see as a return on investment report. So I know you spoke about the, Dr. Seuss machine for the money. I want you to know exactly what we've done with the money and what kind of results we got. So you'll be hearing that from us. Every summer, State of the Union data analysis done by the principals. We had our first one this June and July, and just really on the road to tracking how our students are doing and sharing that with parents on a regular basis. So those are things people can come to join us and hear about. I would also just say that, stop by and, we'll be having a sort of open house at the Ed Center to welcome people back to school. Even if you don't have kids in the school, we'd love to see you. I'll also be presenting at the Senior Center about budgetary questions and things that folks who don't have children in the schools have questions about. Why do we do certain practices, and information about cost and
Right.
things like that. So I'm a very open person, happy to have those conversations, and very much enjoy meeting with community groups.
Well, thank you so much. We have just 1 minute. I'm going to end with a quick anecdote. I'm not going to give you necessarily a chance to reply, but years ago, I think it was 2009 or so, I ran Bill Heck's campaign for mayor, and he ran as a conservative, and I happened to be at a party totally separately, and nobody knew the connection per se. And a woman who was applying for a job as a principal with within one of the schools in Newton, she's like, "Oh my God, if that Bill Heck gets in, it's going to be horrible. We're going to have to." He wants to open the process for principal salaries to open bid or whatever. And she's like, "That's that would cost me whatever." She was planning to get. I think she did get whatever. But I'm just wondering, if you ran this as your own business, or when you get your kitchen redone or whatever, how do you do that, and how do we do our job, kind of hunt and pricing within the schools? Is it any at all similar?
I guess I don't understand the question.
Fair enough.
I don't know what a principal open bid is.
Well,
it's not something I've ever
fair
heard
enough.
of.
No, I understand that.
Are you saying, like, how do you run it more fiscally responsibly?
I guess. Well, we're going to have to wrap up. We're going to save that for next time.
Okay.
Maybe the analogy didn't work. I apologize.
Okay.
But it did come up in conversation. Anyway, thank you so much. We're the Newton Taxpayers Association. Find us on Facebook. Send us some notes. I'd love to hear what you thought about this. Maybe we can have Dr. Nolin on another time. It was certainly an honor and a pleasure for me, and
Likewise.
I really appreciate your thorough answers.
Thank you.